evening and thank you for joining us tonight. Welcome to NTD's special coverage of President Trump's first 100 days in office. President Trump holding a rally in Warren, Michigan today to mark the occasion. He's also signing an executive order on his way there to give some tariff relief to the automakers. Joining us now live is NTD's White House correspondent Iris Tao, who's at the rally. Good evening, Iris. Tell us more about the rally and President Trump's plan in Michigan today.
Good evening to you as well, Tiff. So at 6 p.m. Eastern time tonight, President Trump is expected to join us right behind us on the stage here at Macomb Community College, a little bit north of Detroit, Michigan. And this will be his first formal rally after his inauguration celebration back in January. It's also to mark, of course, his first 100th day in office. And while Macomb here is known as the home to Reagan Democrats, it's also right at the Motor City Center here, where it has seen the rise and fall of the American auto manufacturing industry. And just earlier today, right before this programming of the rally, Brian Pennebecker, a 25-year UAW worker who spoke at this rally, told NTD that he believes that Trump pegged this specific place out of all places because it represents an important base for President Trump, which is blue-collar working class. Watch.
They may not have college degrees, but they get up every day and work hard to support their families. And those are the kind of people Donald Trump is fighting for. We've gone downhill for the last 30 or 40 years, but the Metro Detroit area, it wants to come back. We want some manufacturing jobs back.
Meanwhile, a main part of Trump's pitch for his tariffs is that he wants to bring jobs back, especially for the auto industry. And earlier today, President Trump signed a new executive order giving some tariff relief for the auto industry. For example, by allowing these companies to not having to pay the extra tariff, for example, for steel and aluminum, if they're paying the 25% tariffs on auto and auto parts already. It's also going to phase out tariffs on auto parts for years so that these companies, the White House says, can have more time to gradually transition their production lines back to the U.S. On his way out of the White House, President Trump said he told reporters that he wants to help these companies during this transition period. Watch.
We just wanted to help them during this little transition, short term. And during this little, if they can't get parts, you know, it has to do with a very small percentage. If they can't get parts, we didn't want to penalize them. And during, you have a one-year period and then they have an extra year, but it's for a very, very small part of the car. Basically, they're paying 25%.
The new tariff relief for automakers comes after the White House says meetings with the CEOs of these big car makers. Meanwhile, on the impact these tariffs are having, for example, on American consumers and on auto workers, Brian Pennebecker told us that as someone who is very experienced in the industry, he believes that while the labor costs for these automakers will go up when they move production lines back to the U.S., he expects them to eat most of the costs instead of passing them on to American consumers. He adds that while there are some automakers who are not comfortable with the new tariffs, he believes that most of them that he's talked to do agree with President Trump's approach to tariffs and do believe that they're going to make their lives better. Watch. Have you heard from your fellow auto workers or members of the UAW about President Trump's tariffs and its impact? How has it impacted people's lives and families here?
Of course, not everyone understands them. Not everyone, is comfortable with them, but the vast majority of the auto workers support Donald Trump. They trust him. We know that he knows what he's doing.
And earlier this afternoon, President Trump spoke nearby at the Selfridge Air National Guard base. He was joined by Democratic Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer. They were announcing new fighter jets for the base. And now their motorcade, Trump's motorcade, is on their way to here at Macomb Community College. So we do expect President Trump to take the stage somewhat on time. Back to you.
All right, Iris, thanks for those updates. And the White House today is highlighting President Trump's economic record while addressing concerns over trade policies. NTD's Washington correspondent Jack Bradley has more from the White House.
Happy first 100 days.
On President Trump's 100th day in office, the White House is touting domestic manufacturing and resetting a global trade imbalance. When President Trump came into office in January, the U.S. had a trade deficit of hundreds of billions of dollars every year, and these tariffs are a means to reset that. The U.S. currently has a base tariff of 10% on all other countries, with reciprocal tariffs set to go into effect after a 90-day pause, on all countries except for China. Now, as far as what Secretary Scott Bessent said for the future of the U.S. economy, he said that tariffs as well as taxes are going to set the stage for the future.
President Trump is referring to is the ability for tariff revenue to give income tax relief. And I think there's a very good chance that we will see this in the upcoming tax bill.
And now the U.S. is negotiating trade deals with 90 countries. Bessent also focused on how domestic manufacturing has been increasing since these tariffs have been announced in Trump's first 100 days. That includes $5 trillion in commitments for investments from trading partners. This includes $500 billion from Apple, $500 billion commitment from OpenAI, and another $500 billion from NVIDIA, as well as $100 billion from the largest chip manufacturer in the world, TSMC, based in Taiwan. Here's Secretary Bessent.
Economic security is national security is economic security, and we saw during COVID that our supply chains got cut off, and we need to bring back a lot of those supply chains, whether it's in semiconductors, medicines, the steel.
Meanwhile, the White House also called out Amazon's announcement that it will include the price of tariffs on the price tag for products.
Since I just got off the phone with the president about Amazon's announcement, this is a hostile and political act by Amazon.
An Amazon spokesperson responded saying the team that runs our ultra-low-cost Amazon Hall store considered the idea of listing import charges on certain products. This was never approved and is not going to happen. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt's comments come as the U.S. has a 145% tariff on China. China, meanwhile, has a 125% tariff on the U.S. Now, these tariffs have come about from the U.S. on China, Mexico, and Canada initially for their roles in the U.S. fentanyl epidemic. Now, Mexico and Canada have both stepped up their efforts to increase border security to prevent fentanyl from pouring in through those borders. But China, meanwhile, has increased tariffs on the U.S. A House Select Committee on the CCP report from April 2024 found that the Chinese Communist Party directly subsidizes the manufacturing and export of fentanyl precursor chemicals that make their way into the U.S. Reporting from the White House, Jack Bradley, NTD News.
Illegal immigration was a top concern for voters this past election, and it gave President Trump an edge. NTD's Fiona G. and Kevin Hogan give us a deep dive on the president's actions on immigration policy in his first 100 days.
We're taking a look at the unprecedented action President Donald Trump has taken against illegal immigration during his first 100 days back in office. What does that mean? That means a lightning-fast response to the border crisis.
Yes, President Trump has been taking wide-ranging action on his plan to carry out what he calls the largest deportation of criminal illegal immigrants in U.S. history. So that involves sealing up the border. Fiona, tell us about what's happening down at the southwest border, what Trump's doing.
That's right, Kevin. President Donald Trump, in his first 100 days, he declares a national emergency at the border in what many are calling the border crisis. Now, he's citing the danger posed by drug smuggling, cartels, gangs, human trafficking, as well as these unvetted military-age males from adversarial nations like China. So what does this emergency declaration mean? It means that the military can go back to the border and the wall is going to be built once again.
Yeah, and speaking of the military, right here we have Stryker units going down there. Tell us about that.
That's right, Kevin. President Trump, he sees the military as a second additional layer of defense in addition to the wall to protect the U.S. at the border. Now, on April 5th, President Trump, he orders the deployment of Strykers to the border. These are these high-tech vehicles that can detect illegal activities both at night and during the day. And then around 6 days later, April 11th, President Trump orders the occupation of the Roosevelt Reservation. That's this strip of land along the border in the states of California, Arizona, New Mexico. And so essentially around 9,000 troops are now stationed at our border.
Yeah, and these Strykers, these are weapons targeting units. They don't have weapons on them at the border. They are able to detect even a mouse's movement at, daytime or night. So,
Right.
okay, Trump's rebuilding the wall.
That's right. Wall construction, it had essentially halted under the Biden administration when they canceled a bunch of contracts. However, under the second Trump term on March 15th, the CBP announces a $70 million contract to build a 7-mile stretch of wall in Hidalgo County, Texas. The administration says that this will help seal up these critical gaps in the wall to prevent illegal immigration.
Yeah, the administration says that illegal immigrants can just vanish in the surrounding communities. And with the wall built, that'll funnel immigrants to correct areas where actual U.S. service members and CBP officers can get them.
Absolutely, Kevin.
Okay, so now we have the result, record low crossings.
Yes, well, first, let's talk about record highs. Under the previous administration, illegal border crossings reached a record high of 300,000 per month. Now, for reference, in 2023, the population of the city of Pittsburgh was only 303,000. So under the second Trump administration, it went to a record low. In February, it dropped to just a little under 12,000 crossings per month. Last month in March, it dropped even lower to just a little over 11,000 illegal crossings per month.
Right.
All right, so there you have it, what President Trump's been doing at the border. However, that's not all. He's been doing a lot with the interior as well, Kevin.
Oh, absolutely. So what you see here is that Trump administration is taking people that they have deemed to be members of the Venezuelan gang Tren de Aragua, the notorious street gang MS-13 members, and removing them from the country using the Alien Enemies Act. Now, this is normally used in wartime, and the courts had to step in and say, no, you cannot use this act to deport people. But here you see these people were deported under it, and they are in El Salvador at CCOT. That's the Terrorist Confinement Center. So they're there, and DHS Secretary Noem, she went there, and then she used that as a means of saying, hey, if a person comes to the United States and they harm Americans and they're illegally here, well, they can end up with the same future as these individuals.
But Kevin, the administration now, it's not just looking at these alleged violent gang members, they're also turning their eye to college students.
Yes, so what you're seeing right here is Columbia University's Khalil Mahmoud. He's a graduate student there. He was arrested by ICE agents. At first, judges said, no, you cannot deport him. They eventually gave the green light. The Trump administration says that people like Khalil Mahmoud are directly opposed to American foreign policy interests, and so Secretary of State Marco Rubio says that's grounds for deporting him. Again, he's a person who led the protest encampment at Columbia University, and as we remember, those protests saw Jewish students afraid for their lives and a lot of allegations of anti-Semitism, so that's the Trump administration's means of tackling that.
And this isn't the only case. We're seeing a similar case at Tufts University, as well as all the federal funding freeze. That $2.2 billion funding freeze for Harvard University is ongoing as well.
Yeah.
All right, let's turn and look at Guantanamo Bay, because that played an interesting role in all of this as well.
Yeah, so this is Gitmo, Guantanamo Bay Detention Center, U.S. base in Cuba, where some Venezuelan illegal immigrants in the United States were sent there. It actually just served as a stopover. They were eventually returned to their home country, Venezuela. But President Trump initially said, ready 30,000 spots at Gitmo. This is a place where the masterminds or the alleged ones of the 9/11 terror attack are held. Here, it's being used for immigration. But those only about 400 migrants ended up being sent to Gitmo, and then it was all cleared. Now it's not being used for that purpose anymore. But at the same time, the American Civil Liberties Union and others sued the administration over the use of it, and they said that this was the first time that they've ever seen that used for that purpose.
And so as a result of all of this, as well as other actions, by day 50, only halfway through our 100 days, 32,000 plus ICE arrests, Kevin.
Yes, so ICE enforcement and removal operations agents, they have arrested 32,000 people, again, by day 50, and these are people that are deemed to be illegally in the country. Again, Trump focusing on the criminal element, and to give you an idea of that number, that's about 7 times faster than the last fiscal year of the Biden administration. So Trump is making a big point of removing them. And again, this 32,000 number by day 50, those are at-large arrests. This means that ICE agents are going into their workplace, they're arresting these criminal illegal immigrants in public and so forth. It's not just a handoff at jails.
That's right, Kevin, and there you have it. President Donald Trump, he has taken a hardline stance on illegal immigration and the border crisis in his first 100 days back in office. This was a big campaign trail promise.
Yes, to recap, sealing up the border and removing people unauthorized to be in this country from the interior, and we're going to have more coverage on Trump's first 100 days for you soon.
Coming up, a look back on President Trump's policies in the Middle East and the progress he made toward ending the war in Ukraine. Stay with us. We'll be right back with more special coverage of Trump's first 100 days. And welcome back to NTD's special coverage of Trump's first 100 days in office. There's been a lot in terms of conflicts around the world, so we'd like to zoom in on those. We have two guests joining us to dig into this. We have David Wormser and Rebecca Grant. David is a Middle East Affairs Analyst at the Center for Security Policy and former Senior Advisor to Vice President Cheney on the Middle East and Strategic Affairs. And of course, Rebecca Grant, she's the Vice President of the Lexington Institute. Thank you both so much for being here. I want to get both of your takes on the president's biggest achievements and missteps when it comes to foreign policies. Let's start with the good, David. What are some of Trump's main accomplishments so far?
Well, in the Middle East, especially, I think it's still a work in progress. So it's too early to say too much. But he's achieved a ceasefire just by the shadow of his coming into office the day before he was inaugurated in Gaza, and in that process, he's managed to get about 24 hostages released, including the first real Americans alive that have come out of captivity in Gaza. So that's an achievement. And also, he's essentially reopened the Straits of Bab el-Mandeb, which lead to the Red Sea and Suez Canal. They're still under a lot of threat, but ships are beginning to pass. So those are two, and that was, of course, because of his striking the Yemenis and the Houthis in Yemen, and that's ongoing right now. But those are two already significant achievements. And then also he's shored up Israeli confidence after the United States and Israel had these ruptures over the last year when the United States embargoed Israel during the war and constantly second-guessed Israel's response to the invasion of October 7th.
And Rebecca, what do you think?
All that, and of course, Iran. President Trump, by using a combination of military pressure with our 2 aircraft carriers, deployment of bombers, has managed to get Iran's foreign minister to show up and engage in talks about Iran's illegal nuclear weapons program. This is a massive change, and there's a lot to unfold, but it's really a tremendous achievement for Trump having put the maximum pressure back on within the first 100 days. He, of course, also has Vladimir Putin negotiating over Ukraine. That's a bit more up and down, but those talks are underway.
And Rebecca, what do you think some of the biggest foreign policy challenges have been for Trump so far in the first 100 days?
Exactly. And I'm going to give him really high marks for his first 100 days. The challenges have come where he's met pushback from some surprising quarters. We're hearing a lot of heavy talk from Canada now that Prime Minister Mark Carney has been reelected. And it's unusual to see a little friction in the U.S.-Canada relationship. Canada remains an incredibly important ally, important for Golden Dome. We've seen some pushback there. We've seen some questions raised in Europe as well. But on the whole, I think just some really tremendous achievements. Of course, the big do out is Russia and Ukraine. That war is not over. It's not close to being over. I think they may be on the road to a ceasefire, but President Trump has not yet notched a win with Putin and Ukraine.
And David, what would you say are the biggest challenges when it comes to foreign policy?
Yeah, I track pretty closely to Rebecca. I think that, first of all, in Europe, I think we've been a little taken aback by how much Putin is determined to continue the war and continue his bombing of Ukraine, and that's disturbing. And his intellectuals are continuing with their anti-American tirades, which are really the fuel for Putin. And I think that was a little underestimated, and we're beginning to come around. On the positive side is something a lot of people would say is negative, but I think it's positive. I think he's put the Europeans on notice that their form of politics, the way they look at themselves, and most importantly, their ability to civilizationally defend themselves is collapsing. And that the United States, it matters to the United States. Europe is our heritage. It matters to the United States that they get it together and rally around their own civilization and own 2,000-year heritage. So I consider that a success. Some would consider it a failure. As far as Iran, I agree it's a success getting them to the table, but I think we're beginning to see the same things in Iran that we see with Putin. These are tough nuts to crack, and they're basically saying, is your threat as bad as akin to Biden's don't? They're beginning to probe us. So that's a work in progress. I wouldn't call it a failure. It's a work in progress, and we're going to have to show them, yeah, we're really serious. And not only are we serious, but our allies are serious, specifically Israel.
I want to get more into the Middle East, but first, Rebecca, as we've both been mentioning Russia, right? When it comes to that Russia-Ukraine war, that is a conflict that Trump said he would bring to an end on his first day in office. But even the president has said himself that's proven to be more complicated than he initially thought. Trump did recently say that the two sides may finally be close to a deal. Why do you think he hasn't been able to make good on that promise yet?
Because it's so complicated. And so he's notched some progress with Zelensky clarifying that he will accept air defenses and air power as the primary security guarantee. I think there is a lot going on behind the scenes as Trump tries to lure Putin with potential economic deals. We know Russia wants sanctions off. They're using the head of their Russian sovereign wealth fund as a key negotiator. There's a lot going on in the background with those economic incentives. Of course, complicating all of that is China. If China had not continued to support Russia, they're still fine with this war in Ukraine. And that's been an enormous complication so far. So we're seeing some pretty serious horse trading right now. Who will get the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant? What's the status of Ukraine? Can Ukraine keep Odessa, which they have, and demine the harbor? All these issues are really on the table. I think it's a sign of progress, but a long ways to go.
I want to expand on that, David, because President Trump has threatened to walk away from peace efforts if Russia and Ukraine can't come to an agreement. Do you think he'll actually do that? What might happen if he does? I guess Rebecca was mentioning, could we see China step in more in that case?
Well, China, I think, has stepped in quite a bit. I think, yes, that's a key point. Is when we say that we're going to walk away from it, I think it was mostly in terms of trying to press Zelensky in Ukraine. Because in the end of the day, Zelensky in Ukraine is dependent on Europe, it's dependent on the United States. So if we walk away, it's really he who feels the pressure. So that was a function of frustration with Ukraine that we felt was not giving what they had to give in order to bring this to a close. And not only that, Ukrainians were paying the highest price in terms of people. So for us, it was pretty straightforward. Look, you guys have a bigger interest in ending this than even we do. So if you're not interested in ending it, then we don't either, and we can walk away. It's a huge investment. But the China part is very serious, and the China lures or lurks really on the Middle East too. We just saw it with the missile fuel that went up in that explosion in Bandar Abbas 2-3 days ago. That was imported from China. We saw China suddenly showing up on Israel's border in the south with fighters. We saw China suddenly resupplying what we think may be Hezbollah in Lebanon this morning. China's out there. Really, they're the Bob Euchre, they're the fight starters, and they're behind the scenes pushing those who are actually doing the fighting to keep fighting. So we have a problem with China, and that's still something we have to deal with.
And Rebecca, speaking of China, there's a report by the Epoch Times citing insider information that was revealed that the Chinese Communist Party leader Xi Jinping and Russian President Vladimir Putin reportedly reached a secret agreement where China pledged to support Russia ahead of its invasion of Ukraine. And there are credible reports that the Chinese regime is also supporting the Houthis and their patron Iran, as we've been mentioning. Now, with all of that in mind, how do you evaluate the effectiveness of the Trump administration approach to the conflicts in Europe and the Middle East?
Well, you're absolutely right. This is now America's number one foreign policy challenge is dealing with China's desire to stir up conflict in so many locations and the really bad ramifications of the China-Russia alliance. I'm glad President Trump is striking hard at the Houthis. The two aircraft carriers and land-based fighters have launched over 850 strikes. We need to see where that's going to go. And China's support to the Houthis is confirmed. Their purchase of 90% of Iran's oil is confirmed. And so we now need to look at China policy as saying that we are, in a way, fighting a multi-front conflict with China where they are stirring up pre-existing problems with the one goal of weakening the United States and stretching out our military. Trump hasn't shown any of his cards yet in the Pacific and what he'll do in relation to Taiwan, other than being really strong in his support for the Philippines, our treaty ally. But the China piece of Trump's foreign policy is yet to unfold, and it is going to determine how America lives in the next several decades. And we must stay ahead also in the tech wars and AI.
And when it comes to, Europe and the Middle East, David, has countering the Chinese regime's influence here been prioritized enough?
I'm not sure it's been prioritized enough. I think, for example, in the nuclear negotiations with Iran, we have to deal with the missiles and we have to deal with China's role with those missiles and probably other technologies that may help the nuclear program directly or the nuclear side of that program directly. So clearly, China is out there making sure that they sabotage our attempts. The second thing is they really emphasize the lack of American will, and they fill the gap so that our don't, as opposed to Biden's don't. They're trying to whittle away and show, the president isn't that serious. He's afraid. He's got all these voices in America that want him not to have another war. And of course, that works against the deterrent and frightening Iran, and to some extent even Russia, into coming to terms with their opponents and to come to a reasonable position. So China's out there undercutting both in the region, in Europe, globally, but also in America with the information war and influence attempts through TikTok and other things to erode and split the conservative movement here in such a way that it hands President Trump a very difficult hand, with one side being much more isolationist, the other side wanting to deal with some of these threats more aggressively. China is really trying to really weasel into that fissure and exacerbate it. In the Middle East, it may be easier because we can sort of let the Israelis do stuff. But globally, this is a problem. China is out to divide the conservative movement, also internally in the United States and with its allies.
A lot to unfold here for sure. David Wormser, Rebecca Grant, thank you both so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Coming up, we take a look at President Trump and his cabinet's approach to China, what has been said and done. Stay with us. We'll be right back with more special coverage of Trump's first 100 days. Welcome back to NTD's special coverage of President Trump's first 100 days. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Turning now to the Trump administration's defense strategies. What has the administration said and done so far? And where does the U.S. stand in facing the threats posed by communist China? Let's take a closer look.
Peace through strength is the Trump administration's slogan for its defense strategy.
The U.S. is prioritizing deterring war with China in the Pacific, recognizing the reality of scarcity and making the resourcing trade-offs to ensure deterrence does not fail. Deterrence cannot fail for all of our sakes.
What's more, the Trump administration is also determined to make the U.S. military a more lethal, stronger force.
Today, there are more executive orders coming that we fully support on removing DEI inside the Pentagon, reinstating troops who were pushed out because of COVID mandates, Iron Dome for America. This is happening quickly. America is back. We are laser focused on our mission of warfighting.
As for how the administration stands on relationships with allies,
we will work with our allies and our partners to deter the communist Chinese and their aggression in the Indo-Pacific. Full stop. By standing shoulder to shoulder with you, our allies and partners, we will put our enemies, our adversaries, those who stand against us on notice.
What's interesting to note is this administration's foreign policy on Taiwan. The island is a key U.S. ally in the Indo-Pacific. Its semiconductor manufacturing and its strategic location make it a significant player for both the U.S. economy and national security. President Trump also said this.
Is it also your policy that as long as you're president, China will never take Taiwan by force?
I never comment on that. I don't comment on anything because I don't want to ever put myself in that position.
Speaking of strategic locations, 2 other choke points have occupied headlines during the first 100 days of President Trump's second term: the Panama Canal and Greenland.
American ships are being severely overcharged and not treated fairly in any way, shape, or form, and that includes the United States Navy. And above all, China is operating the Panama Canal, and we didn't give it to China. We gave it to Panama, and we're taking it back. Greenland is necessary, not for us. It's necessary for international security. You have Russian boats all over the place. You have China boats all over the place, warships, and they can't maintain it.
Trump is also seeking to divest supply chains of rare earth minerals to cut reliance on China. The critical minerals are used to make weapons.
One of the key priorities in President Trump's America First trade agenda is addressing China's unfair trade practices. In the first 100 days of his second term, what strategies, policies, and actions has the administration taken to reshape the U.S.-China trade relationship? Let's take a closer look.
All we want is fairness. We just want a level playing field. We don't want to take advantage. We've been having massive deficits with China.
So China is exporting their policies to us. They decimated our manufacturing sector.
Tariffs is not only a tool, but a policy for the Trump administration. The goals: to deal with China's export overcapacity, rebuild U.S. domestic manufacturing capacity for critical goods, and secure key supply chain resilience.
I know it's what President Trump believes. He believes 3 things. 1, that it is a good source of revenues. 2, it protects our important industries and the employees. And 3, he's added the 3rd leg to the stool, and he uses it for negotiating.
Washington has imposed a total 145% tariff rate on Chinese goods, including 20% for China's role in fentanyl trafficking. Beijing retaliated with 125% on U.S. goods. The world's 2 largest economies together make up almost half the global economy. The U.S. accounts for 28%, while China takes close to 20%.
I'm not going to say, I'm going to play hardball with China. But ultimately, they have to make a deal because otherwise they're not going to be able to deal in the United States. I think we'll make a deal with China.
Mr. President, in your meeting with...
If we don't make a deal, we'll set it. We'll just set the number and,
The Trump administration is publicly setting the stage for a deal with China, with the president saying he's already spoken to the Chinese leader. Plus, a South Korean media outlet reported that senior Chinese officials entered the U.S. Treasury building the morning of April 24th. Despite that, Beijing is insisting there are no active talks happening between China and the U.S. China claims it's open to talks, but only if the U.S. drops its 145% tariff first. On the other hand, China has told other countries not to team up with the U.S. against Beijing.
At the end of the day, that we can probably reach a deal with our allies, with the other countries that have been long-term. They've been good military allies, not perfect economic allies, and then we can approach China as a group.
Since April 2nd, what Trump called Liberation Day, when tariffs were imposed on U.S. trade partners, more than 100 countries have approached Washington wanting to negotiate. So far, Washington has emphasized non-tariff cheating during trade talks with partners, citing plans to address the issue of Chinese products being routed through the third-party countries before entering the U.S. The tactic has been widely used to skirt U.S. tariffs on Chinese goods in the past. Besides restoring fair trade with the U.S., the Trump administration is also looking to take a greater role in leading and reforming international institutions.
America First seeks to expand U.S. leadership in international institutions like the IMF and the World Bank. The IMF needs to call out countries like China that have pursued globally distorted policies and opaque currency practices for many decades.
Treasury Secretary Bessent added that treating China as a developing country is, quote, absurd. Looking back to President Trump's Day One memorandum, America First Trade Policy, reviewing China's unfair trade practices is one of Washington's top priorities.
And House lawmakers say that bringing back American manufacturing and becoming less reliant on China are not just good economic moves, but also matters of national security. NTD correspondent Jason Blair reports.
Republican Chair Rep. Eric Burleson, during a hearing by the Subcommittee on Economic Growth, Energy Policy, and Regulatory Affairs, said that in the 1950s, the U.S. accounted for 40% of the global manufacturing and now accounts for 16%. He said that over time, leaders favored globalization and over-regulated domestic manufacturing, as well as created huge obstacles for permitting for new manufacturing. He said that this stunted manufacturing in the United States, and companies slowly started putting more manufacturing offshores into foreign nations. And he said that this is when China stepped in and filled the void.
China leaned in heavily on cheap labor, slave labor, and suicide-inducing labor conditions to achieve the manufacturing share that it possesses today. And China's position as the current world leader in manufacturing poses economic, military, and national security threats to the United States.
Burleson said that easing the regulatory burden as well as streamlining permitting will help bring back more American manufacturing. Now, ranking member Maxwell Frost said that Democrats stand united in creating more high-paying American manufacturing jobs in communities. He said that he doesn't agree with the current administration's tariff policies as a way to do this, and he wants to put the American worker at the front and center.
I look forward to working with my colleagues from both parties, as well as workers, labor representatives, private industry, to continue the manufacturing boom that was started by Democrats over the past 4 years. But this effort must never be at the expense of safety, dignity, and prosperity of the American worker.
Subcommittee member Rep. Clay Higgins said that decoupling from relying on China for manufacturing is also a moral and human rights issue.
Cheap products produced in abhorrent conditions on foreign soil, subsidized by communism, and produced by child labor and slave labor, not only should they not be available for a cheaper price on our shelf, they shouldn't be available at all on American shelves.
The subcommittee invited a few expert witnesses in to share their perspectives.
We weakened our supply chains to save a buck in the short run. We gave China the lead, and through turning over our supply chain to them, we gave them in plain sight hidden control of our national security and our economic security.
And the only way to reindustrialize this country is to leapfrog the Chinese system, which has been built on the back of slave labor conditions, enormous CCP policy-led energy subsidies, raw material subsidies, that are simply not a level playing field with American innovation.
And another witness said that offshoring critical industries is not just an economic initiative, but also a national security mandate. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Jason Blair, NTD News.
And joining us now to analyze President Trump's China strategy is John Pelson, author of the book Wireless Wars, China's Dangerous Domination of 5G and How We're Fighting Back. John, thank you so much for joining us. Good to see you again. Now, President Trump's second term has been marked by the fast and the furious when it comes to executive orders and sweeping changes. When it comes to China, the biggest differences this time are the 145% tariffs and axing of the de minimis exemption. Having experienced firsthand the uneven playing field in China, how effective do you see the Trump administration's actions so far in curtailing that?
Well, I'd say it was limited. The improvements made in the de minimis were really important. And I think what we're seeing, or at least China is seeing, is that this time we're a lot more serious about the types of constraints we're going to be putting on their products.
And on that note, we're seeing, cargo shipments from China to the U.S. fall 65%. That's according to the global logistics company Flexport. How likely are we to see more investors, companies pulling out of China, viewing it as, say, too risky, citing arbitrary detention, stolen IP, trade, etc.?
Yeah, there's two separate issues here. One, reliance on China for the supply chain, and that's definitely going to take a hit. but the idea of actually operating in China, physically being there, which really any company that's doing business where there's manufacturing happening there needs to have its people go on the ground at least sometimes. That is a scary thought. People do not want to be held, denied ability to leave the country, and just subject themselves to basically an environment where there is no recourse. China has made that very clear, much to their detriment, that if you're operating in China, you have no protections against their arbitrary actions against you. And that has got to have just about anybody who's thinking about it scared and thinking we don't want to be on the ground in China right now.
Now, when it comes to a potential deal, President Trump has said that Chinese regime leader Xi Jinping has called him. China denies that. Now, Trump is also saying that China needs us more than we need them. Given that, what would a trade deal look like?
Yeah, the fact is we both need each other. And if you look at it on the opposite side, there's this basically the new mutual assured destruction that kept us at peace with the Soviet Union during the Cold War. And that was, the concept was we know that you can destroy us and we can destroy you. And that kept the countries from getting too aggressive. The Soviet Union had really nothing to offer economically. The new Cold War is kind of the flip side of that. We need China for our own success and prosperity, and they need us too. And if there was a complete instant decoupling, it would be very bad, I think, for the whole world. But the problem, of course, is that while this model has led to great prosperity for the United States, and I think it's lifted hundreds of millions out of poverty in China, it's been done in a way that's left America and really the whole very vulnerable to actions by China that have nothing to do with business, but really have to do with their desire to extend influence and authority over other countries around the world. So the reliance is real. You can't simply walk away from China, say we're not going to buy or sell anything with China anymore, but you need to move that way for important strategic goods.
And John, other areas we've seen movement is on, say, reshoring, boosting defense capability, like the shipbuilding facility in Philadelphia, going after China's role in fentanyl trafficking, foreign influence through funding in our institutes of education, and signaling to allies in Europe and the Middle East that the U.S. is shifting its focus to China and protecting our own border. What do you see as the Trump administration's core message when it comes to China?
Well, there's definitely the part that I like is the message that we're not going to allow them to abuse us, and they've really taken advantage of, I think, good faith on our part. We act like this has been a trading relationship, that these are commercial disputes. My argument has been, not just in wireless wars, but in all my talking and writing on the topic, that China is using commerce as a weapon. They're not trying to make more money off of us commercially. They're trying to use commerce to strengthen them geopolitically, help them in the way that you would build a navy or an air force in the intent of asserting your will over other countries and other sovereign countries. I think Trump has made it clear that that is not going to continue. And that's a big plus in what's happening right now with this White House. The commercial side, he may be doing the right things for the wrong reasons. If he's doing it so that we can have low-end manufacturing brought back to the United States, I don't really see the value because people don't want to do those jobs. Our unemployment is so low for generations in this country. But for strategic things, for important things, we can't rely on China. For pharmaceuticals, for defense technology, for important things that without which we can't generate electricity or power our economy. That's where we have to draw the line. I think Trump has made a pretty clear message to China that the time that they'll be able to walk all over us is coming to an end.
I want to continue this discussion, but really quickly, on screen, you're about to see the location in Warren, Michigan, where President Trump is set to speak at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. As far as we know, that's still on schedule, so we'll be showing you more clips of that as we get closer to that time. But now back to our interview here, John. As we look ahead for the next 100 days in the Trump administration, what do you think we'll see from this administration on China?
Well, I do hope things kind of settle down some. There's been a whiplash going on that isn't good for anybody. Now, to be fair, Donald Trump has done a lot of negotiating in his career. He's a Queens real estate developer. That means he's used to sitting across the table from union bosses and from mob bosses and from Queens real estate developers, which are, I think, the toughest of them all. So he knows how to throw people off, how to bluster and bully an opponent if that's what he's got to do. Hopefully that's why there's been this chaos to date. I don't, I'm hoping that will not continue because our own allies in Europe, in Latin America, and the rest of Asia, and our own continent really need some stability here. And we've got to maybe settle in on what exactly we're trying to do with the tariffs and the trade changes and really direct our energy against China. See if we can get our allies and our trading partners pointing at China, especially countries like India, pointing at China and not at us.
And speaking of stability, John, I want to switch gears a little bit because inside China, there's growing reports of high-level CCP officials getting purged or disappearing from the public eye. But given that many were known as Xi's proteges, some analysts are suggesting that Xi could be losing his grip on power. First off, do you believe the Trump administration is aware of this, as in Xi's weakening grasp on power? And if so, what would that mean in terms of how Trump deals with China?
Yeah, I do think that President Trump has advisors counseling him that know exactly what's going on there. There's been some shakeups. Some of them have been good, some of them maybe not so good, but there is a lot of expertise that this White House is looking to for insights on what's happening inside China. As far as what Chairman Xi's done to his own kind of leadership cadre, I think the idea that he's purging corruption, I don't see that as the driver because he'd probably have to purge the entire leadership of the Politburo if he were doing that. You know, what he's looking for is loyalty, and the danger there really isn't, you know, it's not so much a question of whether he's losing power, but whether he's now living in an echo chamber where he may do some foolish things. You do not want to be negotiating against someone who's got bad information and bad advice, because that can lead to them doing something that's counterproductive for everybody. You want to have some confidence that they'll know what's in their own interest in China and not do something stupid. If he's cleared out everyone who's afraid, you know, everyone who's willing to speak to him is gone. Everyone who's left is afraid of him. He's not going to get frank advice and say, you know, we shouldn't be doing this. It's going to be a negative consequence for the whole world. So that's my one biggest concern about the purges.
Big developments for sure. John Pelson, as always, thank you so much for joining us.
Nice seeing you, Tiffany.